Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV, and we are continuing our Hürtgen Forest week. And we've gone from the kind of tactical overview on the first day with Ed Miller talking about Hodges and Eisenhower and broad front strategies and the post of the Normandy campaign. We did a bit of that with Edwin last night, but then we focused on the misery of being there, the terrain, the weather. We looked at trench foot and evacuation possibilities and the trails. And today we're going down even deeper, and we're looking at the story of one individual, that individual who was a medal recipient and whose collection is on display at the museum where my guest works. So my guest is US Air Force veteran Frank Blazich. He is a curator at the National Museum of American History at the Smithsonian. He was on previously talking about animals in Animals at War Week with Lucy when I was co-hosting with her, and I'm delighted to bring Frank back in. So good afternoon, Frank. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Paul, and howdy, everyone. And yes, I spoke about pigeons, so there you go. Pigeons.
That was it.
Happy.
It was pigeons.
And it's great to be back here. Greetings, everyone, from the National Museum of American History. Here I am in my exciting office. And what I'm going to talk about today, it relates to, I'll get into the slides. It really relates to the fun part of this job, which is you never know when you open your inbox what kind of donation offers you'll receive. And it's not every day that you have a donation which includes a Medal of Honor. And naturally, when you're collecting an object of anyone who has received the nation's highest award for military valor, you have to say, well, what's their story? Who are they? And do we even remember who they are? I'm sure people can rattle off certain names. Audie Murphy, we could say Alvin York, Samuel Woodfill, Ernest Evans, trying to get some Navy guys out there. We can throw some of these names out there and we probably know their story, but this individual, perhaps much like the Battle of Hürtgen Forest itself, is somewhat unknown today outside of his hometown of Camden, New Jersey, as well as outside of the immediate family, who understandably are very, very proud of their uncle and have been fantastic people to work with. We're very generous in sharing and not just donating artifacts here to the museum, but also sharing some of the records and some of their own recollections about their uncle. And that's who I'm going to talk about today. So I don't know how we can roll into the slides, or do I just...
Yeah, they're up there now. You can control. But just to say, Frank, what's interesting as well is that we've talked, as I said in the intro there, about the decision making behind why certain divisions, why certain corps are going for certain directions, and the policy behind it. But most people under the rank of about major had no idea what they were doing. And Edwin made the point, they don't even know where they are in the forest. They don't know, is it Belgium? Is it Germany? Which way are we facing? Is it north? Is it south? And this is typical of the kind of people that could end up becoming heroes, is that they didn't necessarily even know where they were. And I think that's part of the charm of what we're doing, is someone at the absolute bottom end who's just doing the very basic job of a soldier. So over to you. And folks, we'll do questions at the end. It won't be a massively long one today because it's one individual story. But Frank will get to answer the questions if there are any at the end of the show. So over to you, Frank.
Okay, thank you, Paul. What Paul said. Frame of reference for anyone, if you're familiar with Samuel Fuller's movie, The Big Red One, although I recommend Big Red One, little reconstruction.
Yeah.
In many respects, the journey of this gentleman somewhat mirrors Fuller. As I mentioned earlier, so on 28 March 2019, I received an email from Steve McGraw. He's actually the nephew Private First Class Francis Xavier McGraw, and he basically sent me this photograph here of this shadow box of insignia, and he said it's his family's desire to donate Uncle Frank's medals and memorabilia to the National Museum of American History. First time I ever had a family reach out and say, I have a Medal of Honor. We want you to have it. And suffice to say, my reaction is kind of, wow. And what do I need to do to first know who this person is and then work to get the family here? So here you actually see on the photo here on the right, that is Steve, and that's his sister Susan Heindel next to him. And here we are actually in our kind of messy work library, and me looking far more swole or ripped in my golf shirt than I normally am. This is pre-toddler days, so dad bod has hit me for all those parents out there. But here they are. Actually, originally we were just going to discuss the materials, and I was a bit surprised that they drove down from New Jersey with everything and said, "Nope, we're confident we want to donate this to you." And so here are the medals, as well as some other items. But the key here was really the goal I set out, which was let's get these items out on display for the 75th anniversary for the actions for which they were received. And then we need to share the story. And this talk is really based upon a blog that I published back in 2019, slightly expanded. Okay, so the subscribers to this channel, you all have just heard two outstanding previous shows that go into greater detail about the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest. It's largely a forgotten and ignominious part of American efforts to liberate occupied Europe in World War II. It's largely overshadowed by the bookends of Normandy, the Normandy breakout, and the Battle of the Bulge. It's sharing the traits of other scenes of conflict. There's acts of cowardice, there's acts of heroism in the worst of conditions. The story of Private First Class Francis Xavier McGraw is really the story of a quiet man from Camden, New Jersey. He's a somewhat unassuming soldier who had already seen plenty of combat in the war. He fought in the sands of North Africa. He was in Sicily. He went through the hedgerows of Normandy, came ashore at Omaha Beach, but it was really among the foreboding trees of the Hürtgen where his valorous stand made him a legend in the United States Army. So here we have a family photo that Steve McGraw shared with me. This, you can see there in the center, is Francis. He went by Frank McGraw. He was born on April 29th, 1918, to John Francis and Mary Ellen in Philadelphia. He would later have two younger brothers, first John Joseph, that's actually Steve's dad, as well as Thomas Dennis, and you can see them there in the picture. His sister, Mary Patricia, would be born in 1925, but tragically his mother died in childbirth. So the elder McGraw would later remarry Elizabeth Anastasia Palmer in 1928, and about that time they moved to Camden, New Jersey, and their home was directly across the street from St. Joan of Arc Catholic Church, which is still there in Camden today. So, as a young Irish American, McGraw spent his teenage years with family, faith, and friends. He graduated from St. Joan of Arc Grammar School, and then he attended and graduated from Camden Catholic High School in June of '37, and voila, we have his diploma here. So with the degree in hand, what do you do? Well, he ended up being a machinist helper at the nearby Campbell Soup Company, which is still there in Camden today. I think they had just come out with actually chicken and noodle soup right in the mid-1930s. So tried to pick the appropriate label here. Again, relatively quiet fellow. In his free time, he played third base on the Joan of Arc baseball team and did his job. Didn't really stick out, so to speak, but he was always close to his family and his friends. Now, as the storm clouds of war formed around the globe in the late 30s and the early 40s, the McGraw brothers began to do their part. The younger John graduated from Camden Catholic High School in 1939, and he enlisted in the Army on September 11th that same year and ended up in the Army Air Corps, then later Army Air Forces. In fact, on 7 December 41, he was a corporal stationed at Wheeler Field in Oahu, and he was there when the Japanese attacked. You see our barbecued P-40 there. He emerged unscathed, stayed in the Army. I think he ended up making Master Sergeant, if memory serves, by the end of the war, and actually separated in late 45. But because of this service and John's involvement, perhaps this is why Frank McGraw will enlist in the Army and be inducted into service on February 25th, 1942. These photos here, again, were sent by his nephew, Steve. We're not exactly sure where they're taken. We know the one there on the far left was actually taken at the home there in Camden. But he enlists in the Army, and he goes off to training as per usual in multiple places around the United States. So he goes to Camp Forest, Tennessee. Then he's at Camp Edwards, Massachusetts. Then Camp Lee, Virginia. And finally, Camp Carabel, which is later renamed Camp Gordon Johnston in Florida. And I don't know if he had ever handled a weapon prior to entering the United States Army, but he proved to be an outstanding shot. He earned his Army Expert Marksmanship Qualification Badge with both the carbine and the machine gun class, which doesn't help because here you see an M1 Garand. We'll get to the machine gun later on. So training complete, he'll head off overseas on 12 December, and he'll arrive in Oran, Algeria, the day after Christmas, 1942. He is an infantry replacement, dumped in one of the repo depots like so many Americans, and he will find himself assigned to 1st Platoon, Company H of 2nd Battalion, 26th Infantry Regiment, the Blue Spaders. And they are part of the 1st Infantry Division, the famed Big Red 1. And McGraw will actually be a .30 caliber heavy machine gunner, so he'll be assigned to an M1917 Browning water-cooled .30 cal. It's a big, chunky weapon. Norman Rockwell made it quite famous in one of his paintings during the war, and you'll see more of that coming on. McGraw's first taste of combat is actually going to be on January 25th of 43, when he'll participate in the fighting. And I'm going to butcher every pronunciation here. So for your geography majors out there, you are allowed to throw tennis balls at your computer screen now. He'll participate in the fighting in the Oseltia Valley and the Huertgen Pass. Paul, you can correct me on all that, against the German and the Italian forces of the Afrika Korps. Now, after the debacle at the Kasserine Pass, he's next going to enter combat on almost a continuous basis from the capture of Gafsa on 17 March all the way through the Battle of El Guitar about until April 10th. He gets a week's rest, and then he and the 2nd Battalion will be back with the 26th Regimental Combat Team under 2 Corps, seizing the Bijamatu Road and the Dejamine Valley, and then he'll move on to seize the hills in the town of Matur, and thereafter Bizerte on May 8th, at which point the Afrika Korps is kaput. So if the Afrika Korps defeated and North Africa back under Allied control, McGraw and the 26th Infantry Regiment will rest, they'll rearm, and they'll train for Operation Husky, which is the invasion of Sicily. And yes, on 10 July 43, McGraw will land on the beaches of Gela, Sicily, and there's a picture of there at the shore there at Gela. And he will fight to capture the island until about mid-August. And once Sicily is liberated, the 1st Infantry will not really rest. They promptly get shipped out to the United Kingdom because they're going to be involved for the training for the invasion of France when Operation Overlord.
And just worth reminding ourselves that some Americans had spent a long time in combat before they got anywhere near the Hürtgen Forest. Some hadn't. I mean, and Correct. Some had. I mean, it's that era, end of 44, where you've got that blend within any kind of corps in the ETO of the veteran divisions that have been there, done it, got the T-shirt, been writing home for 2 years overseas, and you've got the other units who are pretty much straight off the boat. And the same thing applies to the Ardennes that followed. Is this combination of old hands and new hands, and it's yes, worth considering how long a war some of these people had. And of course, as well, not neglecting the British people who had a long war. The 50th Division had been all the way through similar campaigns. So, they're not always green, the troops that were in Hürtgen Forest.
No, absolutely. And McGraw, again, is a machine gunner. I mean, here's a man who saw a lot of combat, fired a lot of rounds, even before he gets to Hürtgen. And Paul, I read your book. I stole your background here because we do have the 1st Division going ashore. I think this is the 16th, or you could correct me on that.
Yeah, 16th.
16th coming ashore here at Omaha Beach. But yes, McGraw will land on Omaha on June 6th. However, for clarity here, asterisk, the 26th does not come ashore in the morning. Rather, they come ashore in the evening. And when the 2nd and 3rd Battalions are ordered to clear out St. Laurent on the right flank of the 18th Infantry. So McGraw will land on D-Day, asterisk, after the beach has been secured. So I don't want to take anything away from the valor of those who had to take it to begin with. But in the ensuing months, he's going to fight, through the hedgerows. He's going to cross France. He'll go into Belgium, and then finally he'll get to the German border. But first, they got to take Aachen. So from September, October, the 1st will be successful in seizing Aachen, and McGraw and the 26th will be caught up in that fighting. But at the same time, as you've heard in the other shows, there's another group of Americans who are fighting to break through the German border fences and move on the Rhine. So again, I'm not an expert on Hürtgen, so this will be the dime store iteration of it. September to December 1944, this is technically into February 45, we'll have the longest single battle in American military history, all over 55 square miles of dense interlocking fir trees comprising the Hürtgen Forest. In this space, the Army incurs over 33,000 casualties, including 9,000 non-combat losses from trench foot to combat fatigue. I think General Cota might fall in the category of combat fatigue, as discussed in some of the other shows. Now, again, in the brilliant fashion of American military leadership, why go around a forest? Instead, let's charge right through it, because who needs air power, armor, or mechanized mobility? Yeah, look, this is too easy. Let's just go straight in. Unfortunately, Nelsonian tactics don't really work in land warfare, particularly not when you're fighting in a forest. So we'll show a little contemporary footage here of some of the remains of a German trench network, as well as the Dragon's Teeth. As we've heard in the other episodes, the conditions of this battle are just brutal and unforgiving. The Germans have fortified these woods with an array of concealed concrete blockhouses. There's minefields. You see here, you have Dragon's Teeth, the block easy tank mobility. It's rainy. There's snow. There's a fog. It's muddy. the topography, the terrain, the undulating nature of the hills. I mean, there's a steep terrain. Folks aren't wearing, the finest in REI Outfitters equipment. In some cases, the uniforms they're wearing have already been through a long amount of combat. They don't have adequate winter clothing. They certainly don't have anything like a shoe pack or anything like that. As Paul's nodding, it's not a happy time. It's not fun. Men are going to break, not just physically, they're going to break mentally. And I think in Hürtgen, you see quite a bit, and possibly part of the reason a lot of people don't want to talk about it is because, unfortunately, men kind of lost it and didn't.
Yeah,
well.
we were talking before we went live about Mary Louise Roberts and her book Sheer Misery, and one of the things she addressed very well, I thought, is how a lot of the veteran units, like the 1st Division, GIs within then had been just ignoring those little things they should have got checked out, little things of sores here and there where their backs had been rubbing, or they'd got problems with their feet, or they've got these little bits of infections here and there. They're maybe coming out of a bout of malaria, things like that. And so those conditions, you can kind of put a brave face on to a certain point. And then when things around you, when the conditions start getting bad, those things start flaring up. And that was a real thing that I think the 1st Division, compared to perhaps some of the other units, were really experiencing, is that collective kind of wear and tear of having been in combat. Well, as you said, they're a week off. They've been at it for nearly 2 years.
Yeah, again, every little thing just gets exacerbated by conditions, and factor in emotional strain too, and the physical just compounds the deterioration. Trying to figure out where I'm on my slides. Okay, more fun things about the Hürtgen. Okay, so artillery, the king of battle. This is going to be a battle with a large amount of high explosives concentrated in a very small area. Be it on landmines, there are still portions of the Hürtgen you dare not go into because of the sheer number of landmines that are in there. The Germans also have these lovely little buggers called Glasmine 43. They're little glass landmines, not easily detected by mine detectors then or now. And there's still areas just off limits because they litter the forest. Not a fun time. Plus, if you're trying to clear mines and the ground is frozen, that kind of complicates your matters, which we're going to see more in Ukraine presently and moving on in the next months. The other fun thing, again, for those folks who perhaps are tuning in or not familiar, if you've seen, of course, Band of Brothers and this whole idea of firing high explosives into trees, you're going to have a lot of tree bursts. And so men who are in these muddy little foxholes with nothing but maybe a GI blanket over them, it's not just a rain of steel splinters, it's also a rain of wood splinters and the wonderful world of infection that comes in thereafter. The Hürtgen, there's nothing redeeming about it at all. So, as noted, the battle will begin in mid-September with the capture of the German town, I'm butchering my pronunciation, of Schevenhütte, or Schevenhütte, I think it's Hut, because we got an umlaut, at the edge of the forest. And this is technically the farthest advance the Americans have made into Germany at this point. And from there, nothing went to plan. But that assumes that there actually is a plan. And what percentage of a plan? We'll say 1% of a plan. It's bad. Again, this is one of these things, as we've heard, what the hell were they thinking, quite honestly? What was anyone thinking? So first, let's send the 9th Infantry Division in, then the 28th Infantry Division in, and let them bleed themselves white in the forest and accomplish nothing. Somewhere Sir Douglas Haig is going, yes, excellent, good job. So then let's try a second larger push, and we're going to fight through the forest. And this is referred to as Operation Queen, and this will kick off on November 16th. So we're going to send the 1st, 4th, and 104th Infantry Divisions together with elements of the 5th Armored Division and a massive amount of air power to hopefully blast our way through the forest. But about that. So let's get back now to McGraw and the 26th Infantry. If you look to your map here on my end, it's the right side of the screen. If you look down kind of bottom middle, you can see Schevenhütte. The 2nd Battalion is in the middle there. 1st Battalion's on the left. 3rd is on the right. So what they're trying to do is get to the Ruhr River. They're going to pass through Laufenburg and then capture Marode. On the right flank of the 1st Division, you have the 16th Infantry Regiment, and then the 26th will find itself facing the forest and one unimproved trail. This is what they have to go through to get to capture these towns and get to the river. Rain and fog is going to complicate matters, but at H-hour on the 16th, which is around noon, McGraw and the 2nd Battalion will advance behind this massive joint air and artillery bombardment. But the progress, quite frankly, is excruciatingly slow because they have to clear out every single pillbox, every single fixed emplacement, one by one by one. In an official history written after the fighting, one officer recalled, quote, "The cost had been heavy in casualties, particularly from artillery and mortars. Every round was a tree burst." So you're constantly being bombarded by exploding trees, exploding shells. Again, your instinctive reaction is to duck. Now, these are first infantrymen who've been through a lot of combat. They know how to take cover, but they've never experienced anything like this yet, despite all the fighting that they've gone through. This is, again, almost relearning. You're having to relearn how to fight and relearn how to survive, most importantly. Okay, so November 17th. And I talked about tree bursts. This photo is actually from December. I know it's been in the previous shows. This is to give folks an idea of a tree burst, right? So you can see all the limbs have been cut away and the trees themselves have been cut in half. That's just from the artillery set to detonate there among the trees. So turning one explosive into a far deadlier explosive. So again, this is 17 November. Now they're running into landmines. They're running into crisscrossing barbed wire, covered by machine gun fire from pillboxes. It's not unlike the Hürtgen Forest of 1918 in many respects. It's a little muddier and it's a little colder, but really the defenses that the Germans are using are very similar to what was used in the Hürtgen.
Yeah, and as you made the point, Frank, it's without the things that the Allies have got used to. It's without air power, without close air support, without the artillery, without the mechanized tail.
All the advantages.
All the things that we've come to rely on that have given the Allies an upper hand are now just not able to be used. And that's why Philip Blood, when I was talking to him when we were there, and Ed Miller and Edwin, there's the references to Passchendaele or the American campaigns. It's definitely got a First World War flavor to it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's a type of fighting that outside of really the hedgerows we've essentially avoided. We wanted to exploit mobility. We wanted to exploit that open terrain, the ability to leapfrog ahead as much as possible. Why? Because there's less casualties when you can do that. In this case, it's hand to hand for every inch. In a way, they're really fighting the Siegfried line defenses is really what we're seeing here. All the while you have this artillery, enemy artillery and mortar fire, and the Germans are quite adept at it. Why? Because Americans in some cases are fighting up hills. They're in exposed positions and the Germans can see them and know exactly where they are. Then add in the other factor of if we try to call in our own counter battery fire, note too the height of the trees. You're looking at trees that are 75 to 100 feet tall. So the only way that you can avoid fratricide is you have to have an extremely high angle of fire, and it needs to be extremely accurate, which you're not really going to achieve in foggy, muddy, icky terrain as you're experiencing in Hürtgen. So you run that risk of fratricide from your own artillery. Not a fun going. But now we come to November 19th. At this point, McGraw is manning a heavy machine gun. He's at a foxhole on the perimeter of 2nd Battalion's line, and again, butchering my pronunciations, in the Schevenhütte Forest near Schevenhütte and Berg-Laufenburg. And from the launch of the renewed fight only 4 days prior, this regiment had advanced less than a mile. So again, we're thinking World War I here. Now, the morning of the battle commences with the 3rd Battalion actually advancing through 2nd Battalion's positions to the east of Laufenburg. We have to remember all these companies are undermanned in 2nd at this point. They've all incurred casualties. So it's easy to look at the table, the table of allowances and say, oh, okay, they have so many, there should be 100 men here, 100 men. No, this is an understrength battalion at this point with understrength companies and platoons. At this point, the 115th Grenadier Regiment of the 47 Volksgrenadier Division will see an opportunity. So their thinking is, well, if we can hammer 2nd Battalion, we can turn their flank, and we can really raise total havoc on the 26th. And so on the afternoon of the 19th, the Germans will launch a rather fierce counterattack, and it's going to commence with an hour-long preparatory artillery barrage. At this point, McGraw is just sitting in his foxhole with the shells falling all around him, and he's manning his Browning M1917, shoots 30-06 bullet, and he basically just ignores artillery fire and decides, let's send some outgoing. And, quote, he will pour deadly accurate fire into the advancing Germans until their advance falters and comes to a halt. So the German artillery the German infantry at this point are unable to advance, and they see the problem. It's over there, right? It's that machine gunner over there. And the Germans then will take cover, and they decide to bring up their own machine gun. It's likely an MG-42. This is actually, the photo here is a captured German foxhole, but you can see there's actually 2 MG42s there.
Yep.
So likely the Germans are going to bring up an MG42. You're going to have your gunner and assistant gunner, possibly a third man. I assume McGraw's a bit amused, like, oh, look at that. Isn't that adorable? And he decides to provide a retort. So he decides to get a better sight picture, stands up in his foxhole, and positions his machine gun. Now, mind you, this is about a 100-pound weapon. We'll pick it up, put it on an adjacent log in an exposed position, and, quote, silences the enemy gun. And I'm assuming he didn't bid them a fine day. Okay, so first time the Germans try to stop, artillery didn't stop him. First machine gun didn't stop him. I got a great idea. Let's bring in Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets. So the Germans begin firing the Panzerfaust at McGraw's position. One of these is going to strike near the American. It's going to knock the machine gun away from him. McGraw gets up, picks up the machine gun, gets it probably back on its tripod or tips it back on the tripod, and coolly reacquires his targets and returns fire. The Germans say, okay, fine, let's bring in a second MG42. Well, McGraw silences that one as well. The ammunition is starting to run low. First Lieutenant Burke Jacobs recalled that McGraw climbed out of his foxhole and actually ran over 75 yards of the fire-swept ground to replenish the ammunition and lug the ammo boxes back. Again, in the photo here, it almost looks like McGraw because this fellow's wearing glasses, but you can see the 1970s firing away. You also see those ammo cans. So I'm presuming McGraw was probably lugging ammo cans and maybe threw a belt or two around his neck. Again, this is all speculation. There's no clear way to know. The ammo dump was actually in a deep trench. And McGraw's first sergeant, Joseph Bruno, said that the German fire was too intense for the ammo bearers to actually bring the ammo to him, forcing McGraw to say, the hell with this, and get it himself. To quote Bruno, I saw Private McGraw make the trip 3 times to pile up supplies next to his gun.
Wow.
On the last trip, he was hit in the arm. Now, I don't know which arm, but it sounds like he probably had a bullet hit him. His arm was bleeding badly, and Bruno said, I told him to wait for medical treatment. But he noted that McGraw said simply he'd wait until after the enemy stopped trying to get through before attending to his wounds. So he's wounded at this point. The gun is still firing. The Germans are still held up. And one German kind of creeps up and gets up to McGraw's foxhole. And McGraw, in his Harrison Ford fashion, pulls out his .45 and dispatches the German. So that threat has been eliminated. More Panzerfausts are fired at him. One of these will manage to shower both McGraw and the gun itself with mud. This was my attempt to find a photo in the Hürtgen of an M1917 mud. Unfortunately, this was blown apart. But picture that thing covered in mud. Okay. So what do? The gun can't fire because it's totally covered in all sorts of junk. Well, the Germans decide, aha, we got him. The gun's silent. They begin advancing directly on him. So McGraw is, again, unimpressed. He begins to field strip the weapon, clean it, reassemble it, load in a fresh belt, cock it, and dispatch the Germans until he runs out of ammunition. So at this point, he's completely out of ammunition, and everything the Germans have tried to stop him have failed. So their forces, quite frankly, waver, and they begin to retreat. Well, McGraw's, the adrenaline's flowing. No, he hasn't had enough. So he picks up his M1 carbine, or a carbine nearby in the foxhole, and begins firing. He's going to kill one retreating German soldier. He'll then wound another. At that point, one German picks up his machine pistol, presume this is an MP30, MP40. He's got a Schmeisser. And he and McGraw get into a running gun duel. And at this point, though, the Germans finally gain the upper hand, and McGraw is mortally wounded. At this point, his war is over. But this one-man incredible stand in the worst of conditions, quite frankly, plays the major factor in repulsing the German attack on 2nd Battalion that day. And on December 7th, 1944, so 3 years removed from his brothers and the family's entry into the war, his stepmother will receive this telegram that you can see before you, informing her of her son's death. On December 18th, Company H's commander, at this point a first lieutenant, Paul C. Heath, will write Mrs. McGraw. And he offers her assurances that, quote, her son died as a soldier in the manner he would wish, fighting on the field of battle against the enemies of our country. He continues, quote, his presence in the line was always an inspiration to his comrades, and they will miss him deeply. He also closes to Mrs. McGraw by noting that McGraw's death was, quote, not without purpose, but that he had made a real contribution to the final victory over the enemy. And for his extraordinary heroism and intrepidity near Schevenhütte, McGraw will posthumously receive the Medal of Honor. This is the actual medal that we now have here in the collection, as well as the actual citation, which were both donated to us by the McGraw-Heidel families. And his father will receive this medal in, fittingly, St. Joan of Arc Parish Hall on 2 November 1945, so after the war has ended, from Major General Leland S. Hobbs. Now, at the time of his death, an interesting thing about the McGraw character, he held the rank of Private First Class, and he had received an Army Good Conduct Medal. Now, why the humble rank? It's clearly not poor conduct, because if he received the Good Conduct Medal, then he wouldn't have had any action, disciplinary action, that would have denied him the medal. So how does he have that, but he's only a PFC? Now, according to the family, because I asked them this, there is some remarkable insight into why this humble man from Camden, New Jersey, put on such a ferocious one-man fight. As McGraw explained in letters to his family home, he had refused all promotions, quite frankly, on the grounds he never wanted to be in a position to order any man to his death. And a private first class cannot issue orders in that sense. A corporal can, a PFC cannot. And that is why McGraw remained a PFC at this action, despite all the combat that he had been through during this time. And why is that? Well, throughout his life, he would stand up to bullies. He'd stand up to any threats to his friends or family. He would defend anybody. McGraw was my height, 5'7", but he would defend anybody who came after him, that tough Irish American. And to his last breath, he remained true to form. And as for that, he is immortalized as a national hero.
Wow.
So he rests today in Belgium at the Henri Chapelle American Cemetery. You can visit his grave, and here it is. He's also the namesake of Francis X. McGraw Elementary School in Camden, New Jersey. He is the only Medal of Honor recipient from Camden. The U.S. Army named a transport after him, Private Francis X. McGraw. There's a photo of it there on the right. That is actually the display we have here in the Smithsonian in our main military exhibition, The Price of Freedom, Americans at War. And you can see this in our military section. And we did manage to get this medal on display in November of 2019, just in time for 75 years to the month that this quiet man from Camden made this ferocious stand in the Hürtgen Forest. And hopefully, by sharing McGraw's story, we're also going to bring greater attention, not just on the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest, but also who were these humble men that go through such extraordinary circumstances. And at the same token, why do they do it, and the lengths that they're willing to lay down their lives for the betterment of the people around them, if not necessarily the wider strategic focus of the conflict. That's all I have here, Paul, on the slides. I'm welcome to take anybody's questions. I've been trying to keep YouTube here on my phone with limited success, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, brilliant stuff. And interestingly and coincidentally, I was standing in front of his grave about a month ago. There's the photo I took. I can't get in the right place on the screen there, but Colin, who's also watching, we were in front of his grave at Henri Chapelle, whenever that was, November about a month ago, about the 11th, 13th, something like that. I didn't know the story then, except what it said in the little booklet that comes with a cemetery. And I'm glad you addressed the fact he's a PFC, because I was toying with, do I put the question out there, why had someone who'd been through North Africa still retain the rank of PFC? But I thought I'd perhaps better not say that in case there's something slightly,
it stood out
behind it.
It really stood out to me because, again, you're getting the decorations and you see a good conduct man. You're like, why is he a PFC? And so that really raised the question. And I was talking with Steve McGraw. And Steve, by the way, for those tuning in, if you Google Francis X. McGraw and then look up Uncle Frank, hopefully you'll find Steve's website. I think it's stevemcgraw.com. He's got other documents and photographs and information there about his uncle, if you'd like to see it, as well as photos of the display here at the museum. But he said, well, we have some correspondence and other things. And he wrote home and he mentioned that he would turn down the promotions because you would think someone with as much combat would at least be a sergeant at that point.
No, definitely.
Or something, staff sergeant, corporal at least. But that's why. And I think it really speaks to his character. I never delved into his Catholicism, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was probably very devout and a very humble man, considering he raised in a Catholic family. The church is right across the street from his home growing up, 3110 Merrimack Road there in Camden. and faith, family, and friends. That was McGraw. That's who he was as a person. And it speaks volumes even to this day that the family, those who remember him, speak very highly of him. And the Army, McGraw Kaserne, there in Germany, after World War II, was named after him. There's a memorial there. I know in Camden, there's a very small marker. It was actually lost at one point. It's been re-excavated and redisplayed. Talking about him, he really is. There's something about his character that he's so well remembered, and that the Army, at least in the immediate aftermath, went to great lengths to kind of memorialize him. And the 26th itself, for those listening, there's a great history to be written about the 26th Infantry Regiment, because there's not a lot of really scholarly work.
Yeah, no, it's all 16th, isn't it?
And they're
18th,
incredible.
come lower. Always the bridesmaids, never the brides in some ways in terms of popular history. But thank you for the presentation. Another thing I was going to say is that the fact he refused promotion is that there also must have been people around him, company commander, platoon commanders, who respected that. Because I know people who got promoted who didn't want to get promoted. It was tough. You're a corporal now. Yeah. So presumably he's got enough support why people say, yeah, no, let's respect his wishes. He's doing very well where he is. Let's leave it there. So it's not just his desire not to go up. It's people around him allowing him to make that decision. I can only assume.
And likewise, I'd assume it as well. I have not, disclaimer, I've not been into the National Archives to do the additional research. For those in England, Kew, fantastic place to research. United States, the National Archives, a bit trickier. Let's just put it that way, a bit trickier to get into research. So I've not had the opportunity to dig into the regimental files, particularly company files, and see what they have on him in there. But I was able to find kind of the Medal of Honor, the press release. I have not actually been able to find, nor has the family, any of the witness statements, which are required. But certainly they do have the press release, and that I think people, you can actually go, it's on Fold 3. I think it's on Ancestry. You can probably also find it at archives.gov, but you can read it, and you can actually read, and the quotes I gave you all came out of that exact press release. So there's more to the McGraw story out there. There's definitely more.
Clearly. I mean, anybody who was killed in that engagement, there would be IDPF files that might have some supporting data. There might be something out in the morning reports. It's, you've done a fantastic job with this level of presentation, sufficient for the museum display. But like anything, it is a rabbit hole that the potential rewards are huge if someone wants to go into it further. The other thing I want to kind of just bring up is that to earn a medal of a gallantry medal when you're in a shitty situation, because it was November. November is the peak shittiness of the Hürtgen Forest. Because I always think, as a Normandy guy, if you take June the 6th, if you earn the Distinguished Service Cross or Silver Star on June the 6th, well, for a start, you've had a decent breakfast. You've coming from somewhere where you've been away from direct combat for at least a few days, if not weeks, if not months, if not years. You're also highly pumped. You've had motivational speeches. You've had Eisenhower's little handout come to you. You may have had something from your battalion commander, your divisional commander. You're feeling the eyes of the world are on you, which means you're starting at a really kind of good position, and you're also dealing with the enemy who have received a massive, great naval bombardment. And this could apply to Iwo Jima. This could apply to Anzio, any of these other first wave kind of assaults. The Hürtgen, though, you're starting at a place of absolute misery. The Germans are starting at a place of having absolutely the upper hand. They've got the better vision. They've got the better knowledge. They've been holding off this advance for 6 weeks, 7 weeks.
They're fighting on home turf, right?
And for someone like to come from that low ebb, and I mean, as Edwin made the point yesterday, just being able to function in that environment was a minor miracle. Being able to function and then field strip a machine gun in the middle of action, being able to draw a 45 and knock out a Joe, to receive Panzerfaust fire, machine gun, it's extraordinary. I mean,
the mental acuity that was needed, and the fact that he was able to keep his marbles together, so to speak, and all this is just, it's really incredible. And I think that's quite a big reason why that he has been remembered, at least in the immediate aftermath. The Army made a point of saying, this is a guy that we want to acknowledge and to remember what he did, considering that, yes, I mean, it's November 19th, the battle, that particular fight, Queen is going to kick off on the 16th. So he's already been through that misery. He's been through all this fighting. He has not come home. He has not had his rest, so to speak. At one point, I think he came down with malaria in Sicily. It's just to still function and be able to function at that level. But again, why? Why does he do what he does? And the motivation, because that's another element. What motivates any Victoria Cross recipient, Medal of Honor? So why do they do what they do? I think in McGraw's case, it comes back to the issue of bullying. He stood up to bullies. He didn't like bullies. He didn't like seeing his friends hurt, his family hurt. These are men that he's been fighting with, serving with, laughing with, comforting for basically since North Africa.
Yeah.
The Germans were killing his friends. The Germans were hurting his family. He wasn't going to stand for it. And something inside him, it triggered something inside him at that moment. And when all hell went loose, McGraw stood his ground. There is again, recommend everyone find Steve's website, because there's a fascinating story that a family emailed where there was one individual nearby. He was shot and became quadriplegic. And so he's there paralyzed in the foxhole, kind of stuck there. His head, thankfully, is above. He's still able to breathe. And he recalls a man firing a machine gun for like an hour plus. He's pretty sure that was McGraw. And it was McGraw's actions that saved his life. He came home and he lived his life. He lived an actual life. Despite being quadriplegic, he managed to live a life as a veteran and come back to the United States and have a life and have a family. And really credits that to McGraw's stand. I think that, again, McGraw probably didn't notice it. I'm not saying that in a rude sense, but he was so focused on stop the threat.
I don't want to second guess a situation I wasn't at, but there are a lot of citations you can read, be it Victoria Cross Medal of Honor, where you sense anger, you sense a real element of, for fuck's sake. It doesn't seem to be one of those ones. It seems to be more methodical, more processed, more calmer.
Yes.
We had a question from someone, I've got to find it again, saying, do we know if he had much of a sense of humor? Was that one reason maybe he'd be able to keep things going in adversity, if he's going to be able to kind of laugh at things? Is that something we know about him?
I don't know if Steve's on the chat. If so, I'd say, Steve, can you let me know? But I got the impression that yes, he was a quiet but a fun person. He wasn't like a very serious, stern individual, but that he had a very warm personality.
Yeah, it was Benjamin Allen who asked about having a sense of humor. And David K, you've addressed this. David K asked earlier about, did the family ever have any contact with people who served alongside him? So the quadriplegic is obviously one case. Yeah, and obviously Steve's got a website. Well, wouldn't it be great if someone watching this could come forward and say, I think my granddad was in that unit. He always talks about a machine gunner who was there. That would be the kind of miracle that can happen via social media and YouTube. That would be fantastic.
If anyone does, let me know. I'm happy to put you in touch with Steve. I think Steve has his contact on the website, so you can reach out to Steve directly. McGraw family, Heindel family, they are fantastic people. And as a curator, it's a privilege. It really is a privilege to have families like this and trust their history and say, we believe in you and we believe in the Smithsonian to tell this story and to share it with future generations. And that's, again, I think something I like about McGraw's story so much is through the just sheer misery of Hürtgen, there's nothing redeeming about it. What did Hemingway say, Passchendaele with Shellburst or Treeburst? There's something very human in McGraw, something very, if you can say, warming in war or heartfelt, I think, in the actions. As you said, Paul, very methodical. You don't see this kind of Audie Murphy, laddie's been killed and I'm just going to go berserk and exterminate the Germans that are coming ashore in southern France. You don't quite see that. You see this very methodical, I have to do my duty and I'm doing my duty for my fellow soldiers. And the respect out of that, out of all the misery of the Hürtgen, to still say, wait a minute, we need to acknowledge this. And so a lot of histories will have that paragraph devoted to McGraw in there. But otherwise, 19th of November is just another day of misery. What is redeeming about that day? McGraw's actions are probably the one redeeming element of that day for the Americans.
And I think people have made the point in the sidebar, and you've made it yourself, is that the best thing is the family now sharing it with the museum, where the story can go to a wider audience. Because as wonderful as it is for a family to have a showcase in their living room for their guests to see and for the family to honor and look at and be inspired by, that's great. And I'm not saying anybody who keeps something within a family is a bad person, because of course they're not. But there's something really wonderful about putting that the collection out into an environment where the public can be inspired by it as well. And it's good that your show has come in the middle of this week, because I was feeling a little bit kind of despondent last night because of leadership decisions. There's this one unending horror after another, and then a story like this that is inspiring about an individual being incredibly self-sacrificing and brave has kind of restored my morale slightly. It's more back on an even keel. We had a question. Someone said, were there any other Medal of Honor recipients? I've just put a link up in the side, but there's about 7 or 8 from the wider campaign. Some of them kind of go towards Aachen and the other, but in that sort of October, November, December era, I think it's about 7 or 8 that you can count as being the Hürtgen. But this one is, I don't want like comparing medals against each other, but this one is truly amazing. It's small boys adventure book worthy. It's impossibly brilliant.
To me, the most tragic element in it, he's killed, and after everything that he had been through, I mean, yes, of course, yes, he dies. Of course, that's tragic, but it's just the nature of it that it's at very, very end the Germans finally get him, and is that not kind of the bitterness of Hürtgen?
Yeah,
in a way that even at the end, despite this incredible one-man stand, that the Hürtgen's so miserable that we're not going to let you even have the best of best. We're still going to find a way to ruin it for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you've answered this, but Andreas is asking, is it on permanent display in the museum?
Unfortunately, when we say permanent display, not really. It's going to be on display probably at least until 2026. But one of the things that the Smithsonian is trying to do is digitize and get as much of our collection out as possible. So certainly the goal here, the medal, we have photographs. I make a point of getting the reverses, the engravings photographed and shared, because there's quite a large community of collectors and other medal scholars that want to see that material. But with McGraw's material, that's part of the reason I wrote the blog. I share a lot with Steve, so Steve could put everything out on his website as well for family and other friends to see. And of course, if any researchers wanted to come here and see the medals firsthand, I'm more than happy to work with that. And my hope is to try and get this again on display again at some point in the near future. We have about 30 presented medals of honor here from the American Civil War to the Vietnam War. And so we're trying to rotate them in as possible so all these stories can be shared to our visitors, both national and international. But as a Hürtgen medal, I don't think there's too many, if any, of the Hürtgen medals of honor that are at the moment really out on display. McGraw's may be the only one that I'm aware of.
No, and again, it's not the medals. The collection is one aspect of the story, but books is another aspect. YouTube, blogs, someone of his caliber can be honored in many ways, with the actual collection being one of them. Steve's family website being another. Tour guides can, I know, use his story in the Hürtgen. So it's being continued. It's being passed on. That's all we can ask. So, I mean, I guess I was going to ask a question. Having someone come to you, you said at the beginning, with a Medal of Honor that must have been one of the best days you've ever had in the office. I mean,
it was a fun one. You can't again. You can be think Willy Wonka, okay? Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka, okay.
Of course,
the world of pure imagination. And so one of the real joys of this job are just the sheer volume of stories and incredible artifacts, but really the incredible stories behind those artifacts that one gets exposed to. I recently had similar examples of that where I was able to collect objects from some notables from the Vietnam War. I had another World War II item that, if brought in, we'll probably be talking again, Paul. But the Medal of Honor, that's an unusual one. That was really unusual to me to have a family. I've certainly been offered Purple Hearts or other decorations or objects. Maybe they didn't have the physical medals, but they had other aspects of a particular individual's life that then one can bring in. I mean, probably the most unusual. You talk about wildest day. I collected a tooth, an actual tooth from an American prisoner of war that was captured in Bataan, was in Bataan, survived the death march, all that, and was on one of the hell ships in Japan. Ended up in Omori prison. For those familiar with Lar Hildebrand's book, Unbroken, about Louis Zamperini, same prison there in kind of Tokyo Bay. Anyways, the gentleman had the tooth, and he had a cavity and an abscess, and the Japanese refused to help him. And a British POW said, "Well, mate, I have a pair of pliers." He said, "Fantastic." So they pinned his head to one beam and guys pinned his arms, his legs, pulled that sucker out. And he wrote kind of his autobiography in the last few years of his life. And his family kindly sent me a copy. And they said, well, we have these items. And then, of course, you immediately read the autobiography, see what he mentions. And he mentions his whole experience. And then there's this period, new sentence, and I kept the tooth, period. And I said, that's a whole the tooth. So the tooth has 3 cavities and this huge hole in the side, a huge cavity. For those wondering, no, there's no evidence of like the pliers, the teeth gripping on.
It's making my face hurt.
But as a curator, you say, people go, why in God's name did you save the tooth? I said, does it not provide a physical example of the depravity of the Pacific War POWs? That a tooth with a huge hole in, I can't see my hand there, a huge hole in the side of this tooth, because it was something that could have been treated, right? But the Japanese refused to do it. I said, that's why you collect that, because there's a story behind this macabre object. The metal, McGraw's metal, that metal, it's a very small decoration. In fact, this interesting plating it was badly made. So the plating is actually popping off. It's red brass with a gold plate. And the plate's even coming off. Our conservators, we'd never seen one like this. And I said, well, it's not about the metal's condition, it's about what it stands for. Where people say the Victoria Cross, it's made out of very poor quality metal, allegedly captured right from the cannon there in Crimea, if I have my history right. And the metals are only like 20 pounds to make, but it's when they're engraved that they become priceless. And the Medal of Honor is when the name is fixed to it. It really becomes this priceless object that encapsulates this incredible moment in a person's life. In this case, McGraw's life. It immortalized him. And bringing that in and knowing this is the highest award for valor, and we've had, I think, 3,500 recipients ever. It is a thrill. It really is a thrill to bring that in. And for those visitors, if you ever stop by the museum, feel free to look me up, because I'm always happy to come down and show you the galleries and share some of these stories, because we have some from the Vietnam War and the Civil War, and wars that this channel does not cover.
I'm hoping someone will copy me and do a Korean War one and a Vietnam. But I mean, just listen to you there. That's a good curator talking, because you're not just going back to the tooth. You're not just seeing the tooth as a tooth. You're seeing the tooth as what the tooth can tell, and it's that interpreting of history that I've read a lot about. And that, who was that guy who worked for the national parks back in the 1930s and 40s, who took over some museum somewhere, and they had this like a collection of dinosaur bones. I think he might have been called a Frank. Anyway, he said what you need to do is kind of paint a dinosaur footprint on the floor of the museum and tell people 60,000 million years ago there was a dinosaur standing right where you are. That way of taking the same information but putting it in a way that is just getting straight to the point. And that a tooth in and of itself is a tooth, isn't it? But if you can connect it to the depravity and the barbarism and what the situation was, that's it. Yahtzee, you've got your result there. You've hooked the visitor, and they understand why that exhibit there. And that's
I don't think I'll ever be able to put the tooth on display, much to my chagrin. But if you want to see a photo of it, anyone here is welcome to email me, and I will happily share a photograph. In fact, it's on Instagram. Go to the museum's Instagram page. You can, I guarantee you, scroll through the pictures. You will find the tooth. The tooth is there.
Well, it's been brilliant talking to you, Frank. I think I will end the show now. So the viewers have got a nice shorter one to watch, because some of them have been long and detailed this week. So it's great to have a slightly shorter one to sort of sit there amongst others. So it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you, and bring it down to one person is great. And definitely, I think you'll be back again. And if you're not back again, I'll see you in March at San Diego.
San Diego
for invitation. Yes. We can talk about that at some point when we know more about it. But Frank, been delightful talking to you. Good luck with the museum. Good luck with I hope another day comes your way where you have an equally exciting contact by someone with some extraordinary story that you can help share, because clearly you are the man to share.
Here's a teaser. Here's a teaser for you. So, and this will be coming out hopefully in January. But for those who remember Betty White, who passed away on December 31st of last year, I collected her American Women's Voluntary Services uniform. And you can go online right now and find black and white photos of Betty White in uniform. Well, we have that exact uniform here in the museum. But the most fascinating part of all is it came with the shoulder bag, and she's wearing it in the pictures. And that shoulder bag was stuffed with military insignia and documents and other artifacts. Wow. And there's some stories in those artifacts. And so I'm doing a blog talking about that, but maybe I can come back on, Paul, and for those viewers, I'll even have them
We have not done a Golden Girl special yet on World War II TV, or a Golden Girl, a singular. But Bayer Arthur was also. Was she?
Women Marines. She was women Marines. Sergeant.
There's a story there in that one, isn't there? But anyway, it's been great talking to you. So, folks, tomorrow Clément Horvat is coming on to talk about the film and the book he's putting together about the Hürtgen Forest. That's great. He made that fantastic movie about the missing Highlander in Normandy. He's just spent another few weeks putting together another project, so that'll be great to talk to a Frenchman involved in Hürtgen. But Frank, meanwhile, thank you very much to you. Thank everybody to watching, and I will see you all tomorrow. This is Paul Woodhouse for World War II TV saying enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.